Good morning. Such a privilege to be here. Thank you to GitHub for inviting me. I've been looking forward to this conference for a while, but hadn't really expected quite so many inspiring stories. As you've just heard, I'm from the UK Government Digital Service. We are often known as GDS, so if I say that, that's what I mean. And we're a team based in London, very deliberately multidisciplinary, bringing together developers, designers, writers, product managers, a whole host of others to work in teams to lead the digital transformation of the UK government. We've been doing that for a while, and I'm going to tell you the story of how that's developed and what it is that we do. But I think I'm here primarily because we've made a real effort to do as much of this as possible in the open. We code in the open, we tell our story in the open, in a way that's been pretty new to governments around the world. So here it is. So the story of GDS begins back in 2010. At the time, the website that you can see on the screen was the UK government's main web presence. It's called DirectGov. It was a consumer-facing portal, because in those days we used the word portal. There was also a separate site called Business Link for businesses. And there was also a problem because there were countless other sites. Nobody knew how many websites the UK government had, and that was confusing for people working in government, but it was more confusing if you were working outside, trying to understand policies, trying to understand the services that you had access to. And from a software point of view, it was run in a very old-fashioned manner. There were major updates and releases maybe every 6 months, and the content management system was so cumbersome, so full of ActiveX controls, that it could take 2 hours to go from having a piece of content written in a Word document to actually publishing that on the web. But most fundamentally, it didn't really meet user needs. It was confusing for citizens of the UK. It was confusing for visitors. It didn't help them get what they needed. And in 2010, we had a general election and a new government and a new minister for the Cabinet Office. So the Cabinet Office is the department at the center of the UK government that coordinates its activities. That's where I work today. And a minister is an elected official, usually, sort of equivalent of a congressperson, but who has executive power over part of government. We had this new minister called Francis Maud, and he asked a well-known UK internet entrepreneur called Martha Lane Fox to do a report, a strategic review of DirectGov. Martha took some time and later published a 4-page letter titled Revolution, Not Evolution, and you can see the start of it here. But rather than making recommendations to improve a website, Martha said, I've not reviewed DirectGov in isolation, but as part of something much broader. She recognized, and the team working with her recognized, that the opportunity at that point in history was not just to change a government website, but to more fundamentally rethink how government works in the modern era. She made 4 key points and recommendations. Establish a digital center for government, bring new skills and new expertise in, give them real clout to make change, so that we're not beholden entirely to suppliers to tell us how we should work in government. To fix publishing, solve that plethora of websites I just referred to. To fix transactions, that means that the interactions that people have with government for passports, for visas, for paying their taxes. And then to go wholesale. It took us a while to work out what she meant by go wholesale, but it was to embed skills and capability right across government so that we could work in a new way, and to open up data and APIs so that other people could build on top of our services. And Francis Maud did something that's quite unusual for a minister. He very quickly said yes. And that gave us our mandate. That was the thing that sparked the formation of GDS. And it wasn't the first time the UK government had launched a new initiative about the internet, but it was by far the most far-reaching. But perhaps what was most surprising was what happened next. Now, those of you who work in large organizations or who have experience with governments might understand what would normally happen here. somebody would write a series of progressively more complicated business cases. In our case, they're called strategic outline business cases, and full business cases. We'd find a supplier through a complicated procurement route, and a large project would start with lots of teams getting going up front, which means everybody spends their time figuring out project governance. That way lies paralysis. When you want to make big changes, you almost always want to start small. And that's what happened. A team of just 14 people, myself included, was assembled in an office behind Waterloo Station in South London. A handful were plucked out of the DirectGov team, but more of us were freelancers or people who'd been working across the UK tech and media scene. And we were given the challenge to imagine what could a government website look like if we built it the right way. So we did some drawing on the walls. That was a bit of a shock to the system for people who ran that building. We made some guesses, we wrote some code, and we threw away more. And we worked at a scale that meant we could actually collaborate as a team rather than fussing about the governance. And after 3 months, this was launched. We called it AlphaGov. Looking at it leaves me a bit reminiscent and also makes me wince a little. Because we'd started with a really strong emphasis on user needs, focusing on what users need of government and government online. But actually, in this case, our challenge was to build something that would provoke a response. And we wanted the government ministers to say, I want one of those. So showing a picture of the shiny new Olympic Stadium, leading with imagery, was really powerful at that point. Once again, we kind of expected that there'd be a pause then, that the sort of normal machinery of government would take over. And personally, I was looking forward to a holiday. But 2 weeks later, we were back in the room. That making an impact had worked, and we were asked to work out how to scale this up, how to make it a simpler, clearer, faster website for government and replace what had come before. So we started to build the team. At this point, we did need more people. And started to change and iterate and really focus on those user needs that we were starting out to solve. So a while later, gov.uk looked like this. And just over a year later, we launched looking a bit more like this, which is how it is today. It's not finished, never will be. It's always iterating, always changing and improving. And what's important here is this. Before gov.uk, no government website, no government technology project, at least in the UK, had been run this way. We procured things, we commissioned them, they were built, handed over, and finished. Here you go, it's done. But as I suspect most of you know, that's not how things work with software. It's not how things work with digital products, and it can't be how government works. And that iterative approach wasn't the only thing that was different about gov.uk over previous efforts. Gov.uk was pushed into being by a series of really major shifts in how we think about design, how we think about software architecture, and perhaps, crucially, how we think about the culture that goes with all of that. As I said before, gov.uk is hardly the first initiative to kind of bring government to the web. You have to go back to 1994 to find that in the UK. But you could say it was the first attempt to bring the web to government. And the timing of that was important. The internet had gradually become a basic resource that everybody relies on in their daily lives. And we needed to act in that vein. We needed to build our products. We needed to respond to our citizens in exactly the sort of iterative way that Chris talked about in his keynote yesterday, the way that you make any modern internet tool. And to achieve that goal, from the start, the team behind gov.uk has used the best practices of the tech industry. That means we work in an agile way, take small steps, test often. We've got freedom to experiment and make mistakes, knowing that they can be identified and fixed as we go. And while some of the biggest challenges in making government work for its users lie far deeper into the system, it's no accident that we started with a website. To really reform the deeply embedded cultures, practices, processes, and technologies of a large organization, you need to get close to your users. You have to understand their needs and their expectations close up. And these days, the website is where you'll usually first meet them, even if the actual change you need to make is somewhere else. And the tweet I just showed of Tom Loosemore's was 5 years in the making. None of us was able to state what we were doing quite that succinctly when we started, unfortunately. But there was another mantra that's quite important in this telling of the story. As you may well know, governments are hugely risk-averse places. One of the reasons they're slow is that people rarely feel empowered to step out and take risks. We don't put enough effort into making sure that management provides top cover for teams who want to be bold. But that wasn't the case for us. We were incredibly lucky to have a remit to shake things up and a real sense of trust. And that's why moving to coding openly seemed very natural. Looking back, I wish I'd recorded the moment, but at the time there didn't seem to be any need. Sometime in the summer of 2011, we just decided we're going to make all of our GitHub repos open. Some of that was about making it easier to tell people we wanted to recruit what was going on, but just as Alvin was saying yesterday, there was also a sense that it's the people's code. If we're making government services for the people, why not give them the code? Maybe they'll help us make it better. And you might be wondering how we got permission for that. But the simple fact is we didn't. We didn't really think we needed it. And some of that was about the team being bold, but more of it was probably about the culture of sharing and trust that had been built up around us. The fact that we knew that we had cover from the management who were really interested in the outcomes that we came and trusted us to discharge the responsibility that came with that. And so far, nobody's told us to stop. In fact, we were allowed to make it a requirement for all new government digital services across the UK government. We have this standard called the Digital by Default Service Standard that any service that has more than 100,000 users a year has to go through. And one of the points in that requires teams to make all new source code open and reusable, publish it under appropriate licenses, or provide a convincing explanation as to why this can't be done for specific subsets of the source code. And that specific subsets is really important. People have had to think about how they design their systems in a different way in order to make them open, but the openness is fundamental to how we're asking teams to work. It's probably also worth being honest that around this time we thought and we were being told that we were alone in the UK public sector in using open source. And we found out we were completely wrong about that. As we went around government and we looked at the systems that we would be interfacing with and replacing, we got under the hood and we started realizing that they were full of open source components. That's probably natural. It's hard to find any system anywhere in the world now that doesn't have open source, baked right into the heart of it. But the culture and the way that risk was managed had meant people couldn't talk about that. And that had meant that teams couldn't find each other. Teams couldn't help each other out. And that's what we've been trying to change. We made stickers saying, "Look sideways," to remind us to look around at what other teams do. And that's by no means easy. There's 400,000 civil servants in the UK central government alone. It's a lot of projects, a lot of teams to find. But doing our work out in the open gives us much better tools to understand that work than if we did it elsewhere. So that's 5 years of gov.uk very quickly. There's a lot more to tell. But since about 2012, our remit's expanded quite a lot. After we launched gov.uk, we kicked off a set of 25 transformation projects, working with 8 different departments around government. We worked with them to reimagine those services, things like passports, driving licenses, and tax, making fundamental changes to how those services worked for their users. We brought a team in that helps run a set of spend controls so that all new IT spend across government gets scrutinized by people who actually know what it takes to make modern technology, not just people who know how to comply with procurement regulations. We've provided in gov.uk Verify a new way for people to authenticate themselves for government services and make assertions about who they are that keeps them in control of their identity. We're building new modern components that help us move faster. We brought over 200 senior leaders in across government with tech and digital skills. And in a project called Digital Marketplace, we're substantially changing how people buy and access services and technology across government so that we can actually make use of commodity cloud services in a way that our previous approach just didn't allow. Perhaps most excitingly, since gov.uk went live, we've been able to work with a whole range of other governments to help them become digital too. We've been watching with excitement and lots of conversations the development of the United States Digital Service and 18F here, similar teams in New Zealand, Korea, and most recently Australia, whose Digital Transformation Office have been able to use the code we developed for that digital marketplace project to accelerate their attempts to change how their government buys services. It was great to hear Alvin here yesterday talking about code.gov, and we've really enjoyed talking to that team and working together, sharing our experiences, and I think there'll be a lot more collaboration there to come. This is genuinely an international movement of people thinking about how to do government differently in the digital age. So that's a little bit of our story. It's been an incredibly exciting journey for me, and I hope that you've seen some of what's happening there and can find similar stories wherever you are. But being in government, I have to talk about something serious, and responsibility. Sitting in government and making changes there, you can't help but think about the responsibility that comes with what you're doing. Significantly changing how people are working is not a cheap or easy thing to do, and you have to take it seriously. And I just wanted to touch on a few elements of that. So we put a really strong emphasis on users first, and recognizing that there's no such thing as an average user, and their needs are constantly changing. We've had to put a lot of work into really stripping down what we do from a design point of view, and focusing on accessibility in its broadest sense. And for many of us who enjoy playing with the latest tech and using the latest frameworks and techniques, that's been a challenge because we have to hold ourselves back from using a lot of them. For our front-end engineers, sometimes they worry that by working on this, they're not developing some of the skills the market's asking for. But actually, the opportunity to really understand how do you make your services accessible to people is enormous. We've made a big effort to share what we're doing there. There's accessibility.blog.gov.uk if you want to know more. But making things available and accessible to everybody is one of our first responsibilities. We also have a responsibility to bring people with us. As I mentioned, there are 400,000 staff in the UK civil service, and they're not all caught up in the change. They're not all equipped to work with the change. One of the slightly surprising projects that we got involved with was changing the security classification policy for UK government documents and data. When I started in government, there were 6 different levels of classification. You can see them up on the screen there, from unclassified to top secret. And there were all sorts of rules about how you handled information at each of those levels. We wanted people to use new tools and new processes and share in new ways, and all of those rules made that very hard. So working with colleagues in what's called the Government Security Secretariat, we significantly simplified that down to just 3 tiers, and that's made a big impact in letting people adopt software as a service tools, collaborate in new ways, and think differently about security, so that rather than it solely being about compliance, you actually think about the thing you're trying to protect. There was a strong message in that we trust individual civil servants to understand what they're doing and to take responsibility for decisions. And that's played out well in many places. But as you talk to people, they're really struggling sometimes with the extra cognitive load that comes with that. Suddenly you have to think about every piece of information in front of you and what's safe to do with it, and that's not easy. We have to do a lot more, in our case, to build up tools and techniques to help people with those changes. And I think many of us are working on projects that have a huge impact on how other people work and other people need to think. And thinking about that, what are you offloading on other people? What effort are you putting on them in the process of simplifying parts of their lives is a vital thing to remain conscious of. And then there are some big, wide responsibilities. Everything changes. The user needs that we talk about so much shift over time, and our understanding of them increases. And technology offers new opportunities. Coming in early, building prototypes, getting things moving fast is fun. Replacing legacy technology is not. there's a huge risk that we're just creating the new legacy. For me, a technologist's main job is to reduce the cost of change. It's not to try the new fancy thing. It's to make sure that as our understanding of our users improves and as their needs shift, we can respond to that. And that's really because some of the biggest problems that we all face in the future aren't technology. They're problems that are around systems and people, and how do we help people with a changing world and difficult circumstances. What we found is that we can improve that significantly by making government services just work for them and making them adaptable. But we always need to remember that wider context and that wider challenge, that what we're doing is really about helping us and helping others help more people. So we're not done yet. We're just starting on this journey. We've come a huge way in 5 years, and we've got a lot further to go. Our open source journey is just starting, and we're hoping to make a lot more effort there to move from simply opening things up to building collaboration, to providing things that are useful for people, and finding new ways for other people to contribute to what we're doing. But I'm very confident that working in an open source culture, bringing some of the best of the cultures and practices of the internet, is the way for us to solve many of the challenges we have coming up. So I'm going to leave you with a saying that we're very fond of at GDS. Make things open. It makes things better, because it really does. Thank you.